Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome to the Lady Wisdom Podcast, where we excavate the wisdom seeds from her story. I'm Clara Moon, and I'll be your guide into this great remembering. Dear listener, I am wishing each of you who are tuning in a blessed harvest, full moon, and equinox portal. Equinox portals are my favorite times of transition, and being that I'm currently in the Northern Hemisphere, I've been contemplating all the lessons in this year's harvest and all that I'm ready to release in this new season of life. The theme of this episode is called Roots. Sometimes in life draws you back to your roots, your origin points, for that deep ancestral healing, returning back to the people and the places that impacted you as a child. I never thought I would live in North Georgia again. If I had it my way, I would be an expat traveling the world. But here I stand on the soils of my own origins, wondering, what am I doing here back in Southern Appalachia? Oh, sweet Southern Appalachia. Only the valleys of the Blue Ridge Mountains can truly know how much the heart can hold. I've been alchemized by Appalachia, died and birthed my soul over and over again in the woods, on the mountain peaks, married beside her sacred waters. This land is ancient, and the longer I lay within her bosom of her valley, the more Grandmother Appalachia reveals her own story. As wildly romantic as it may sound, it's truly difficult to walk through the woods of North Georgia without still smelling the fresh scent of blood that lingers from the past trauma of slavery and civil war. Some towns here have more battlefield grave sites than homes, and I have to acknowledge this painful history because it's part of our American story. And so much of this painful past is still so saturated in the culture of Southern Appalachia. So in my quest to dig up the roots of the past, sometimes we can find ourselves face to face with the good grief of our families, of ourselves. But remember, the roots are what have sustained us, what has survived through countless winter seasons. These roots represent how our ancestors have survived. And as my mentors have taught me, many of the Yorubian African traditions, before we start or do anything here, I want to grant Abase, which Abase means I give reverence to. So Abase to the ancestors, our inspirations, our roots that ground us. And in my preparation for the Soil of this Roots episode, I discovered a book by Leah Penningman called Black Earth Wisdom at a nearby elixir bar. Something inside my soul cried out when I read this passage. A true calling to the land invites us to be in genuine service. It is our birthright to be in service to the land, and it is the only way we can heal our trauma. End quote by Alcee Parks and Whitney J. Leah further shares in her book that part of our work as healing our relationship with this soil, these origins, is unearthing and relearning the lessons of land reverence and innovation. from the past. Part of healing racism and classism in America is to give credit where it's due to the Black, Indigenous, and Asian peoples of this country and other countries for their contributions to all of their regenerative ways of tending to the agro-ecosystem. So Abase, Leah, for that wisdom and that insight. I really want to thank you, dear sister, for all of those conversations in that book because it really inspired me. So upon moving back to North Georgia, naturally I wanted to find my community here. And in my quest for authentic sisterhood, I met a woman named Stacie Marshall through the muscadine vines of community connection. I had heard about the racial reparative genealogy and the regenerative agriculture she was doing on her farm, and I already felt magnetized to meet this woman and her family. Of course, it's not long until we finally cross paths in town. You know how small towns are. And eventually, Stacie Marshall invited me and my dear friend Amber to her land for a good old-fashioned tea party. I was very eager to get to know Stacie deeper and see Mountain Mama Farms. So even though it was a rainy spring day, we put our mud boots on to go walk the land, accompanied by the cutest baby sheep. The land was vast, nestled in the dirt town valley of the Appalachian Mountains. I witnessed this land just open up. It just begun to tell all of its stories. It had held on to all of these remains of the past, from the old farming equipment to the horse-drawn tractors to the old sharecropper house that somehow still stood hanging on by its nails. And as we walked, I listened to Stacie's story, and the land started to tell me its story. And while we were walking, I noticed two plants near the sharecropper house that felt auspiciously significant at the time. The first plant, milk thistle, was fiercely spiky and beautiful with the soft pink middle that looked like a breastbud of nature. As a doula, I know this plant well in its power as a galactagogue in assisting milk production for breastfeeding women. Milk thistle represents to me the innate connection we have to these milk lines of maternal nourishment and resilience, because it has been said to be the embodiment of Mother Mary's milk itself. Her milk is thick and her spikes are fierce. And as she also protects our body from poison and toxicity. I've witnessed milk thistle as a powerful detoxifier, especially for individuals diagnosed with cancer. As a child, my dream was to cure cancer, which later down the road led me to study nutrition and dietetics. And in my early 20s, I would volunteer at the Atlanta Cancer Support Community, teaching cooking demos on clean eating and how to change your diet, essentially. And the diet change was for those who were fighting for their life or for who had survived the war on their own toxic cells. Suddenly the wisdom sprung forth from the plant, from the land, and it said, whatever you aren't changing, you are also choosing. Ibase, milk this. The second plant on her land, burdock root, growing prolifically in big bushels outside the doorway of the old sharecropper house. Now, burdock is auspicious in American folklore because it's known by witchy women to counter magic, shielding its barrier against negativity and evil hexes of hurt. And as a plant ally, it is known for its powerful blood-purifying characteristics that flush and clean out the toxins from our body and from our lineages. So to me, burdock root symbolizes the connection to our blood and how we can choose to clean out the old narratives of our lineages and restore and heal our bloodlines. Ibase, burdock root. So I was greatly impacted by the wisdom of these two plants, and for months it left a deep impression inside of me. These two plant medicines help me to remember the healing and the restoration work that is happening here in the Deep South and also within our human families, mending the blood and the milk lines of the past through the deep ancestral healing work. For months, I was consumed by these lessons and witnessing how it was playing out in our lives in this human story. So I felt it was important. I felt it was essential to explore this thread and open up a conversation and interview with my friend Stacie Marshall. And then I felt perhaps that's why I'm here to excavate the her stories in the deep, deep South.
Take me back to the time when I first believed, way back to the day I first fell to my knees. Take me back. Take me back to the water where you washed me clean from my sin, from my trouble, from my sorrow, from my pain. Take me back. Oh, take me back. Back to my roots, to my
Today, I am in the home of Stacie Marshall, and as you can see, we're in this historic kitchen.
Mama's kitchen.
Mama's kitchen.
Mama's.
I'm so honored to have you here. Stacie Marshall is a female farmer of Mountain Mama Farms, and she is building food sovereignty in Southern Appalachia because she is passionate about racial restoration by narrowing the disparity gap between the different people in her community, especially people of color. And in North Georgia, she lives with her family on these ancestral farmlands of her ancestors, where she crafts her healing selves on the same countertops where her grandmother once rolled her biscuits.
That's right.
So I think you're a truly remarkable human, Stacie, and it's been beautiful to witness, to see how you pioneer your way towards regenerative agriculture and being this embodiment of the female farmer, which is really a rarity in these parts of the world. And I know that you're a mother of 3 beautiful daughters who have captured my heart and my soul. And they will soon to be young women, just sparkle so much joy on this land, in this world, in this culture here, across this new era of femininity.
Yes, let it be.
I just wanted to mention, I know that you also are doing a lot of advocacy work in your community, and you are a co-founder of Hester's Heritage, which is committed to the reparative genealogy through community conversations and preservation of enslaved burial grounds that support Black farming initiatives. We just went to these ancestral grave sites.
And visited the ancestors today.
Yes.
Oh, I am so grateful to be here with you today and to be having this conversation. And I feel so expectant in just telling this story and slowing down, because I just feel you are a dear friend, and we have both been on this ancestral healing journey together, and just grateful to share some of those learnings along the way with others here.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. And let's dive in, shall we?
Yeah,
I got some questions for you. I've been cooking up, and I've been eager to ask you so many things. So one thing, because To give context to this podcast, the episode is about roots and connecting back to our roots. And there's going to be times in our life where we have to go home and we got to deal with our origins and our root points and our lineage points. And I would love to hear a little bit about your roots, where your family came from.
Well, yeah, it is really profound to visit a place that held us as a child. It means something so different to us. As we return to those places that hold memories of our people, and this place in Dirktown Valley here in Northwest Georgia is that for me. It is a home here, not just in this farmhouse, but in this community is where I grew up. And I grew up in a farm-centered, agricultural-centered community. And I didn't really know how rare that was until I went away. I think that some of the ways, the culture that I grew up in, because it was very centered around this agrarian way of life, there was a lot of generational connections throughout this community. And so I knew that my family had lived in this valley, had settled here from and England, and had been here for around 200 years. So I would hear stories from my grandfather and even my great grandmother, who was still alive when I was born, about different farms that were farmed by the family, different families that we were in community with. There was always this passing down of stories, and it was so connected to place, very connected to place. So I think I grew up, that was one of the greatest gifts that I got from my ancestors, was this deep connection to place and community. I have memories growing up of seeing this really interesting commerce here. This is an area that has been labeled with high food insecurity, but the way that people have navigated that generationally has been with a lot of dignity. And I think there's been this barter system in place where it would be very, very common that we would go on the back of our porch and there would be a mess of beans and some tomatoes that a neighbor had dropped off. And just the language of my family in this community was farming. It was a lot about how's your cows doing? How is Dolly, your milk cow, doing this week? Is she in milk yet? Or I heard your horse, was lame. Do you need me to help you? I mean, there was a lot of that exchange that I had growing up and bearing witness to.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me about how you kind of fell away from that and left for a time and then came back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What brought you back? Like, what was that brought you back?
Yeah. Well, I like a lot of kids that grew up in rural communities, was kind of, I guess, taught that there wasn't enough here for us. And so I went to college. I'm very grateful for that opportunity to get an education. It was a wonderful experience. But I remember the day I left, my grandmother cried. I remember having this longing for this place and the stewardship that I had learned from my people. I remember having this longing to, I really hope that one day I can return. And I didn't return really until about 20 years later. But what brought me back was actually the death of my grandparents and my mother. My mother got sick very, very suddenly with pancreatic cancer and died very suddenly. Within her illness was a span of 6 weeks. And my grandparents passed away 5 months after her. So it was an intense season of grief, an intense season of caregiving for me. I was nursing babies, and I was caring for my mother, and I was caring for my grandparents, and just in this middle place of my family, and stepping into that, receiving that role and responsibility. And it was a hard time.
Spectrum.
Yeah,
Full spectrum.
Full spectrum. To see, my daughter taking her first steps when my mother was taking her last. It was watching those generations coming into be and transitioning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really focused a lot of my energy for about 2 years on helping my people die. We had, I think, because in some ways growing up in a farming community, you get so familiar with life and death. You deal with both within the span of a day. You may have a crop that dies, but then you may walk out and find a new batch of baby chickens. And so you're kind of used to that part of life is normalized for you. So I found that like my grandparents and my mother both were very comfortable in their dying process and very open about it. And so it was my grandparents' wishes that that we would move back here and steward the land. And so because of that, my grandmother would write me notes towards the end of her life. There's notes sprinkled all over this house, like on the back of, there's a buttermilk pitcher, and it says, this is your Aunt Emmer's buttermilk pitcher. And, there was a boot box that had all of these family documents in it. And my grandfather just began to tell stories because he knew that it was time for these things to be passed to the next generation, and that I would be the family historian. I would be the next storyteller in the family.
HERSTORian.
HERSTORian.
Officially a HERSTORian.
Yes. HERSTORian. Absolutely.
Yeah, that kind of segues in my next question, because, you were talking about this sort of phenomenon that was happening of experiencing, birth and death happening simultaneously, as you're becoming a mother. Could you tell me a little bit more about your motherhood journey and what you discovered, some of the stories you discovered from your father?
I gave birth to my oldest, Addison, who is now 16. I know.
Already a woman.
That's what she thinks. But she is becoming
a
and it was a moment in my life again where I think we think sometimes that everything is going to be the same. And I was very blessed that at that moment in my life, Addison had her great-grandparents there, her grandparents. And so I saw the joy I got to see the joy on my grandfather's face when he saw that I had a child. Mm-hmm. So I brought her to visit here. She was 2 weeks old, and I had a natural birth. That was really something that was just so empowering for me in my own way to find the ability to have a child unmedicated, with a lot of support and help from the community. But the birth was really relatively as easy as natural childbirth can be. But it was my first baby, and I was learning how to the birthing process, and I ended up losing a lot of blood on my first birth.
So you were hemorrhaging after
hemorrhage. And I didn't really, honestly, I didn't really know how to take care of myself in that, and ended up just really sick. And I think that affected my milk supply significantly. And so Addison was a healthy 8-pound baby. And it was really important. I really wanted that nursing bond with her. I wanted the nourishment and the medicine of breast milk. But that first week, I could tell that she was losing a lot of weight and that she was not eating, wasn't getting enough milk for me. I couldn't even get my milk supply up. And so I went to an herbalist. I went to a lactation consultant. I got on blessed thistle and fenugreek. I was taking all of these herbs and nursing her on demand. And so I was really exhausted from all of that. And I came here to visit Mama and Papa.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came in the door, they were so excited just to be with her. And we sat here in this kitchen, and I was nursing Addison, and she was fussing. And it was just the strangest timing to me. But my grandfather was so alarmed by her not eating and started telling this story that had been passed down to him from his grandfather. And so I'm sitting there nursing my daughter, and I'm hearing my grandfather, and the words out of his mouth, which, were the reason that, you are having this problem, I think is it's a generational problem with women in your family. And then he starts talking about my family's history of enslavement. And he said that the family enslaved a woman named Hester, who was a wet nurse, and that she had nursed his grandfather and all of their siblings. And this was before the Civil War. And that and the way that he told this story was surprising to me, because I was thinking, as he was telling me this story, he was speaking about Hester with this sense of respect and honor, but then there was also this dissonance to it, because he had never met Hester. She had passed away before he was born, but he was telling the story the way his grandfather would have told him. Mm-hmm. So then he said to me, she loved our family so much that she stayed with the family after the Civil War. And so I remember hearing that and thinking, as we hear these family narratives or things from our elders in our family, like, how do I correct him in this? There's some dissonance here. This was a woman in my family enslaved. I'm sure that the reason she stayed with the family was very complicated with the systems at place for her at a time. But I think in the moment, like, what I was so struck by was more just that this story had found me in the place of nursing my own child. And it felt to me like an interesting spiritual connection to the memory of Hester.
Yeah. When you first told me this story, it gave me full chills, because we often talk about our bloodlines and like who we're connected through, our ancestry in that way. Yeah. And then I realized you're not only connecting with your bloodlines, you're connecting back to your milk lines, because this woman, milk was the nourishment for your ancestry, the lineage for you to live on.
Yeah.
They would have not survived without her, the gift of this milk.
Yeah. And I think really for me that moment was hearing that story and thinking, I want to honor Hester well by really re-examining the narrative and how it's being told. That she was in bondage, but there was bonding that happened, and how complicated that was in the story. And I really began this journey of, honestly, my first reaction was, it was just this visceral response of shame. And I remember thinking, like, this, family history and this farm and all of the things that we have taken this pride in, I remember feeling like this is such a blemish and a tarnish on all that. And thinking, like, really questioning holding that family history and seeing this part of my ancestors in a way that brought me a lot of angst. And so I kind of held that for many, many years. I wanted to say that I was more evolved, that I didn't deal with white guilt or white shame. Like, I wanted to say that. But I think I really began to, unfortunately, how the narrative of white supremacy and patriarchy had really woven its way into my family's story.
So that's really like the work that you've been doing lately has been a bit of like retelling those narratives.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's the moment of even centering in the why. You know, why tell the story? Because I think that, you know, the heart has intentions. And I think that is where we have to find our place of conviction in these stories. So for me, I think it was important for me to think of how to process through this story well, and that it needed to be a communal story, that this story had been held within my family for 150 years. There's a verse in the Bible that I love that says, you know, to bring things forward into light. Like, that's when freedom is found. Like, you can't, like, things hidden in darkness, you know, bad things happen when we hide things. And yeah, when we suppress things. So I really began to process through that piece. I processed through like the responsibility piece too. You know, I mean, I would talk to my family, and most people in my family's response was, that's just the past. Leave it. It's just the past. And, you know, don't air the family's dirty laundry. And I also wanted to be incredibly respectful that I was holding someone, our family, this was the responsibility piece. Our family was holding someone else's family's history.
Yeah. Skeletons in the closet.
Still. 150 years later.
Skeletons in the ground, skeletons in the closet. Yeah. They were hiding away.
Yeah.
But those skeletons are jewels to someone else. A treasure beyond valuable to know where we come from. Yeah. To know and have that connection to our ancestry, to the people who came before us and their stories be remembered. Yeah, so it's like what I see you doing now is with the Hester's heritage is helping us to remember those stories, especially of the previously enslaved. Those stories, digging them up.
Yes. So you know, after my grandparents passed away and we moved into the farmhouse, I found the slave records here. And there were no names. There were 7 numbers. There were 2 men, 34 and 36 males, 1 female, 33, 4 children, 2 female, 2 male, ages 5, 8, 3, and 6.5 months old.
You think those were Hester's children? The woman was Hester, and
yes, had to be.
And her, and she obviously was the producing milk because she had the baby.
Yeah, so that validated the story for me. That
was the proof. That was
the here's a document. So it was like the family. This wasn't just family folklore. Here is a evidence. And so I went to my elders in the community that interestingly in Dirt Town, we have predominantly Black community here. And I went to 2 of my spiritual mentors who grew up during segregation here in the South with my father. It was my father's childhood best friend and his wife. And I visited them and they really were eager to see the records themselves. And so we sat together and told them about Hester, the story that my grandfather had shared with me. And they asked if they could pray for me, and that if they prayed that the generational curse of white supremacy and racism would be broken in my family. And they prayed that we would find Hester's descendants. And so we looked together for 4 years, and we did interviews with other community members. And this is the reparative genealogy piece. So reparative genealogy is when anyone that has early European settlement approaches their genealogy to highlight those indigenous or people that their family has enslaved, in hopes of restoring that family history back to indigenous communities and descendants of the enslaved. So it's highlighting and focusing on the enslaved people in your family's history, and those records are often embedded in family Bibles, in family trees, and family documents that are not available to the public. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's a place of disparity, mm-hmm. of where I knew that we had parts of the puzzles pieces. And so we went through this journey of looking, and had the opportunity to be interviewed by the New York Times. And it was right after the murder of George Floyd, and right around the Trump election when he came here and did a rally. So the energy was high. And we had the front page of the New York Times on July 4th, 2021. Yeah. Powerful. And the purpose was to kind of show our quest to look for Hester's descendants. And the story was widely received, and wildly. We saw and received both like the best and worst of the community. A lot of love. Oh my gosh, a lot of outpouring, a lot of other family stories, and a lot of encouragement, and then a lot of questioning. And it was so obvious to me that this is such a historical wound, that individuals were reacting in their own time and place in that wounding, and honestly, like the hardest, and I think the most harshest criticism came from a lot of white-bodied people who had not metabolized their own family story and in trauma. And so, it was like interesting how white supremacy kind of manifested itself in either flat out just hatred towards like the Mosleys and I being in relationship and doing this work together. There was that piece, but then there was also you're glorifying this history, white savior, So there was this obvious realization that our story it does mirror our nation's history and deepest wounding. And so that's why this story it's so personal to me. And I think, again, it's something that I'm passionate about talking about as a white-bodied person, that, I'm not trying to speak on the Black experience here, but what I'm trying to really process through is this historic trauma that my family has been actively a part of and hasn't processed through in generations. And so that is a new thing that I'm trying to start in the way that I'm telling this story. As we began to walk through this journey, we had a historian that reached out, and she said she would help us to find Hester's descendants. And she lives here locally. She read it in the New York Times. So it was just crazy, because the story went around the world and then ended up right back home.
Yeah, right back here at the roots.
Right back here at the roots. And so for 2 weeks, I worked with her, and we made a list of the families the lineage that came from Hester, which is very, very broad after 150 years. Oh, just her people.
That's significant.
Gosh, it was just so significant to see this one woman and her history, and in her children, and then where her children's children went and where they lived, and and we were going through all of the different lines. And then there was one family name that came up, and so I recognized it, and she began to investigate that lineage, and it ended up being connected to the elders in my community that are my next door neighbors that had been on this journey to find Hester's descendants with me for 5 years. So
They didn't even know.
yeah, they've been here.
They didn't even know.
Her people have been here.
And then you're just now making the connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
And seeing how everyone's interconnected.
And we're so interconnected. And they had well documented their family history, but could only document until around the Civil War-ish, 1890s was about the time frame that at that point they had said they did not have much information on. And that was obviously because of the piece that we've talked about with the enslavement, that the curse of enslavement was to really erase a person's identity, to not look at them as human, mm-hmm. right? That's why it was a miracle that we were able to, that Hester's name survived 150 years, that she prevailed. Her spirit, she prevailed. Her name was remembered.
I think that speaks to this kind of resiliency that's here, that's embodied in the land here. When we walked on the land and we saw those really spiky milk thistle and burdock root growing right outside the old sharecropper house. Mm-hmm. And I got chills walking over there with you, because it felt like those plants were like a symbol of, resiliency and overcoming challenges. It's like a little spirit whispering through these like plant allies that are living here on the land with you. And I remember telling you about the magical properties of milk thistle and burdock, and a lot of the folklore that goes back into those two plant medicines. You mentioned that when you were having trouble with the lactation and the milk letdown, you were taking the milk thistle, because milk thistle helps with the milk letdown for breastfeeding women. And yeah, that felt wildly symbolic that it was growing right there. That medicine that you needed for the mother's milk is right there, right next to the sharecropper house. And it felt like kind of a hinting towards, this is the medicine you need for the healing of your milk lines. And then that burdock there felt like a medicine that you might need for the bloodlines, because burdock is like a blood purifier, and it's diuretic, and it has all of these kind of American folklore with it kind of being like a protection amulet, something that you use to ward off negativity and to keep sort of bad spells away from you. The fact that burdock's growing right next to the sharecropper house, that was a spell that I saw in the plants there. The land's telling its story to me, plant by plant. And the burdock, we were talking about how, the burdock was braided in the hair. They would come over here on the different slave ships and carried that medicine with them across the sea, or from wherever they were brought from, and planted so much of this. Part of the ancestry piece to me is also like connecting back to the plants and connecting back to the land, and listening to the medicine that comes from there. To me, that burdock was really telling me that day of like, you don't have to carry this ancestral shame anymore. Yeah. That you don't have to carry the shame and the greed of your ancestors. That any of the negativity things that we have inherited, the stories and of our bloodlines, that we don't have to carry that anymore with us. We can process that and digest it and give it back to the land, give it back to the earth, give thanks for the lessons.
And produce something really, really beautiful with that medicine.
Yeah. But it's, I don't know if you ever taken burdock, but it's like this is wrong. It is wrong medicine.
It's bitter.
It's bitter. It's bitter medicine.
Yeah. I think that the medicine, it has been so interconnected. And to the land story, we went to visit the ancestors and do a pilgrimage. Hester's descendants and I. That again was a sacred moment, because there's no evidence that actually, we can't 100% know if that is Hester, because there's no name on the tombstone. There's just a rock. But in my family records, it is believed that she's buried amongst my ancestors. And so when we went there together, I brought flowers for Hester and brought flowers for my ancestors. And I had this moment of, really, do I put flowers on their graves too? And as I sat with Hester's descendants, and they were working through their process of forgiveness and forgiving my ancestors and for what had been done, and I got to witness that radical love and moment, and the power of that, and to know that, like, the medicine of forgiveness, like, it's not just for others, but it's for ourselves. Because what I could feel was that I didn't. And so to offer forgiveness to those ancestors, to still feel responsibility in what was done, that there's still a moment of that in the present.
Accountability as well.
Yes, to do what was right. But even that is honoring of my people.
Yes.
Because I had a cousin who's really had a hard time with this. Everybody has those cousins. We all have some in our bunch of folks. Goodness gracious.
You're cracking me up, girl.
Everybody's got one.
Keep going.
So she was speaking her mind to me about the whole thing. And when we had a long conversation about it. And at the root of it, she thinks that I'm dishonoring family. One of the things that I was able to say to her is, weren't we both taught to tell the truth? I'm not dishonoring the family. I'm doing exactly what our people told us to do.
Yeah, so you're not hiding anymore.
No.
That's brave. It takes a lot of courage.
I've been able to witness a tremendous amount of grace in this journey, because when I met with Hester's descendants, I was wondering, like, do I apologize? Like, what's this moment here? And I did offer that I did. On behalf of my family, I said, I'm sorry. Even though I have not individually participated in slavery, like, there's not an individual moment. Sometimes there's moments in our community and in our family where we need to say shit that should have been said generations ago. We need to say it. Someone needs to take ownership. And I, in that moment, like, was able to hear just a sense of thank you. And that's also not necessary. We are in love. We are in love. And our stories are connected, and our lives are connected too. And we know each other. And we can have this conversation because we trust each other.
Yeah. Well, I'm really proud of you for the work that you're doing in your family, in your lineage, in your community, internally, all of the above. It takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing. A lot of bravery. And in a lot of ways, I feel like you're kind of rebelling against a lot of these stereotypes of how people have perceived you, or these sort of archetypes of what they want you to be, right? Especially coming back to the female farmer piece in your family. This farm has been run by men.
Yeah.
for generations and generations. And you're the first in your family to take you will be taking ownership of this land, and you are currently farming this land, and you're the first really female farmer of your lineage, besides the previously enslaved people that once worked these lands. Yeah, so I was just curious if you would share with me about, some of the challenges of being a female farmer here in Southern Appalachia, and how you overcome some of those challenges.
Yeah. The average age of an American farmer, 68, 69 years old, and the majority farmers are white males. So we have a profession that is male dominated and is edging close to retirement. And so, as you can imagine, most of my farm community here is of that demographic. I really have been working a lot on the last few years on that nonviolent love
Communication.
and communication in my heart. I think when I first moved back to the farm, the proving was really strong in me. That imposter syndrome was really loud. It's still loud in certain things that I do around the farm, like the equipment is a lot. When a tractor breaks down and we need a mechanic, I used to go to a pretty impostery self-talk of like, gosh, like why don't you don't know this, or I wouldn't show that I had a need out of fear of being judged. Or I would hide some of my lack of knowledge. And then I've just like stopped having a complex about that and I'm just going to hire a mechanic. It's tough because especially with some of the land acknowledgement and work that I'm working on, I think I'm being called into question if I'm capable to run this place.
So that feels edgy, and there's a lot of tension there, especially with your father, for example. There's some.
Yeah, I think we have a deep love and respect for each other, and I think we are both in this place of I think I have a vision, and I think he is in a place in his life where his season of farming is transitioning. He's aware of that. So we have moments where there's control, there's frustration. And again, I feel like that's the thing with generational farming that you're working out. I have felt at times really lonely in community. I have also been surprised by community. I think someone's being biased against me, and then I realize like they're actually trying to help me. So it's really a constant practice for me, holding compassion for others and holding compassion for myself. And I have a in my lifetime, and I don't think it will be healed completely, but I hope it will be further along than it is right now. And I hope that when I pass this land down to my daughters, that the soil is more repaired. The history that was told here is more connected to community and people. I hope that that's their inheritance. Their inheritance is not just to have this place to keep it, but to have this place be passed down to them and for that regeneration to continue with their generation.
Wow. And so it is. And so it shall be. Yeah, the legacy that's going to live on here moving forward through your girls is going to be legendary. Thank you so much to allow me to interview you today. And you've been such an inspiration to me. And I really think that your story will empower and inspire so many other people that are listening to this. And maybe it touches them in a strange sort of way.
Yes. Amen.
Well, thank you so much, Stacie, for joining me today. I see you. I honor you so much.
Grateful.
I'm so grateful for you.
So like Stacie shared,
her family held on to these secrets of these roots. And what I find inspiring about her story is that she had the courage to excavate that evidence of slave documentation and decided to do what she felt was right in her heart, to remember Hester's name and to honor Hester's lineage by giving her descendants access and the privilege to know where they originated from. Our origin points are significant parts of our human story. In understanding our own root systems that lay the foundation for the rest of our lives. We all crave that connection to our lineage, our origins, our roots. And as we wrap this episode, I hope Stacie's story has inspired you to reconnect to your own roots and honor the indigenous land and legacies we stand on today. The power of healing our past lies in reclaiming these stories and building a more just and abundant future. If you live near the North Georgia area, Stacie Marshall is hosting a free community heritage dinner at her farm on October 12th. You can connect with her more on her Instagram, which is at Mountain Mama Farms, or you can find her at mountainmamafarms.com. And I would love to share a special thank you to the musicians of Kindred Fire for allowing me to utilize your song Roots in this episode. Kindred Fire is getting ready to release a new album called Appalachian Gothic. And this album will be released on September 24th on all the streaming platforms. However, if you live in North Georgia or you live near Rome, they are going to have a huge album release party at Cosmic Dog on Saturday, September 21st, right next to the confluence of the three sacred rivers, the Ottawa, the Usanala, and the Coosa River here in North Georgia. This podcast was soul-led, funded from the heart, and if you desire to support this art of storytelling through my lens, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack at ladywisdom.substack.com and receive more behind-the-scene photos, bonus recordings, and writings of this episode for only $5.55 a month. All of the events I mentioned, the community connections, and the virtual gratitude jar will be linked in the episode notes. Thank you, beautiful soul, for rooting in with me today under the glow of this epic harvest full moon. And I wish you peace and ease as you transition into the next season of life. Always remember, you are divinely rooted and we are interconnected, my friends.
Take me back to the altar where I first saw the light, where I laid down all my burdens and I gave you all my life. Take me back. Oh, take me back. Back to the day my soul was saved from the life I used to live. Mama prayed I'd never stray, and I'm thankful that she did. Oh, take me back. Take me back. Back to my roots, to my